Welcome to Human Rights Education Now, podcast series from Human Rights Educators USA. I'm your host, Bill Fernikes, a member of the National Steering Committee of HRE USA, a collaborative network to learn, teach, organize, advocate, and innovate for human rights education in the United States. This podcast aims to raise awareness about human rights education and invites listeners to engage with the worldwide movement to make human rights education a core focus of educational programs from preschool through higher education and in both non-formal and informal community educational settings. Today's program is a conversation with 5 human rights educators who served as Kirby Edmonds Fellows for Human Rights Educators USA. Cara Anderson, Ariana Zegbali, Hallie McCrae, Carly Sandstrom, and Emma Tolliver. The Edmonds Fellows Program was established to honor the memory of Kirby Edmonds, a longtime human rights advocate and educator and one of the founders of HRE USA. In this episode, Cara, Ara, Hallie, Carly, and Emma discuss the origins of their interest in human rights issues, how they learned about and became involved in the Edmonds Fellows Program, projects they pursued during their fellowship periods, and other human rights education activities in which they participated during and after their work with HRE USA. Okay, well, it's a great pleasure to have what I would call the all-star team of Edmonds Fellows here today with me to discuss their work at Human Rights Educators USA and human rights education in general, based upon their own personal experiences and what they've seen in the world around them. So I'm going to introduce each of you. And as I do so, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are right now in your life. I'll start with you, Hallie.
Hi, and thanks so much for having us on here. My name is Hallie McCrae. I am currently based in Los Angeles, California. I am a recent graduate from the University of California, Berkeley. So I am finding my way through the human rights post-grad space, currently working in a preschool and helped out on a campaign in this past election and figuring out how I want to continue to further engage with human rights and human rights education. But very excited to get to talk with all you guys today.
Great. Ara, why don't you go next?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana Zegbali. I also go by Ara. I'm currently a senior at UC Berkeley. I'm studying psychology, journalism, and public policy. And I was a Kirby Edmonds Fellow for HRE USA last summer. And it's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Emma, you're next.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. My name is Emma Tolliver. I'm currently a JD candidate at the University of Washington, so I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I was a Kirby Edmonds Fellow this previous summer in 2024, and I'm interested in criminal justice and international human rights law.
Okay, Carly, you're next.
Hi, I'm Carly Sandstrom. I'm a recent graduate of Columbia University, where I received my master's in human rights studies. I'm currently located in Marquette, Michigan, where I'm a grant administrator for Great Lakes Recovery Centers. And I'm really excited to talk to you today.
And last but not least, Cara.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Cara Anderson. I am a senior at Albion College in Michigan, studying political science and English with plans to attend law school in the fall. I was a 2023 Edmonds Summer Fellow and had the honor of serving as a fellow supervisor and research scholar this past summer and fall. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to go around to each of you and ask you this initial question. What initially inspired you to be interested in human rights and human rights education per se? And anyone can begin.
I can go ahead and kick us off. I will attribute this to when I was younger, I had a very strong sense of justice, which sometimes got me in trouble at school when I disagreed with the decisions of teachers and administrators. But really, I was like, from a young age, really just very interested in these ideas about fairness and equity. When I was too young to have that vocabulary to know what those words meant. Um, I also had family members who were involved in community organizing. My grandpa was the president of the local NAACP chapter from where I grew up in Central California. So I was interested in politics and community service. I was like always involved in student government and Girl Scouts, like from as early as like elementary school. And eventually I sort of rolled these interests and my passion for fairness into one coherent goal, which was that I wanted to do work that advanced human rights and protected others.
And let's go over to Carly. How about you?
I was raised by two teachers in a really small town. So I think I was first introduced to human rights issues through my parents' encouragement of the books that I read. They often encouraged me to read nonfiction books about international politics or US-based like human rights issues like race or class or social justice. And from a really young age, my passion for like human rights and justice just kind of took off and has led me to where I am today.
Okay, Kara, how about you?
So I've always kind of been interested in human rights generally and had really strong morals. I'm a Christian, and I think when I was younger, that's where a lot of that started to come from and the desire to be serving and helping others. But then in high school, I had the opportunity to take a summer pathways course in human rights through the University of Chicago. And that was where I first discovered what the UDHR is and really spurred me to want a career in human rights and protect them.
Aura, how about you?
I'm a first generation immigrant. I'm originally from Iran, and growing up in the US, I think I definitely witnessed and experienced a lot of racism and discrimination firsthand. Also, just seeing how my, parents were treated as immigrants at their age and the challenges they faced, it just really opened up my eyes to the inequalities that exist out in the world. And I think those experiences were definitely painful to experience, as a kid. But I also reflecting back on them, I think they were super formative. They definitely instilled in me a really strong sense of justice and wanting to stand up for myself and others who face similar challenges. So growing up, with all of that, I realized that I could help shed light on some of these issues and advocate for human rights. So it's definitely been something that's fueled me up until now.
And Hallie?
Yeah, so kind of similar to as Emma said, I think I grew up in a family where there was a really strong compass for justice and moral values and community based on the experiences of my parents and our family members. And those kind of lived experiences then informed wanting to shape a world and a community and a family that was based on justice for all. And I grew up a very, very shy, kind of closed off kid, and I knew that I wanted to do something to help my community at a local level and my friends and my family and my city, the state. I wanted to really engage in any way possible. So from an early age, I got involved in our community service club at school, which was my first big introduction to kind of formally working in the community and working alongside others to pursue human rights and social justice. And from there, I was able to kind of break out of my shell a bit and felt empowered by those around me who were also working to pursue justice in every avenue possible. And from then, I just continued to get involved in human rights organizations, learned the vocabulary and the theory and the importance of community organizing and gathering to pursue justice and a stronger, better, more equitable world for everybody. And organizations like HRE USA then have kind of given me the space and the platform to learn with and alongside others to continue working in this space. But it's kind of where I started off.
What I find interesting is that every single one of you omitted formal education. So I'd like to ask this question. Did you have any actual study about human rights issues in your K-12 education? And if so, what was it like? Anybody can start.
Start off, I think when I had gotten to high school, I was really, really lucky to go to a prominent school in a big city where we did have access to a lot of human rights education through formal education and organizations on campus. So once I kind of hit that ninth grade mark and transitioned into high school, there was a more formal system of education on human rights issues and social justice issues. A lot of the teachers at my high school as well were focused on human rights issues and in their own personal studies and focuses. That was a large part of our curriculum. We also had a very prominent administration that focused on social justice and human rights issues, and an organization, Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, that I was a part of in high school that was able to percolate into the classrooms and into the curriculum of a lot of classes. So I do feel very lucky that once I transitioned into high school, I did have more than most an implementation of formal human rights education in my studies. But I know that that's not the case for everybody.
Carly, what about yourself?
Personally for me, I went to high school. I was in K through 12 in a rural small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So the vocabulary around human rights was not introduced to me formally until I was in college. We of course talked about different injustices in some of my like AP classes, but never using like the human rights vocabulary that I'm equipped with now.
And Cara, what about yourself?
Very similar. The human rights vocabulary wasn't really used in K-12 education. Didn't become familiar with it till I took that summer course through U Chicago. And I took a lot of history classes in high school as well. And I do not remember learning about the UDHR until the college level classes.
Emma?
Similar to Carly and Kara's experiences, I grew up in like a pretty rural area in Central California. That sort of vocabulary around human rights just wasn't used there.
Go ahead, Aura.
Yeah, for me, I also had a very different upbringing when it came to my K through 12 education. I was always really back and forth between Iran and LA. So I felt like I didn't really have a very stable, human rights educational experience. I was really only introduced to it when I started at UC Berkeley and then was introduced to HRE USA. That's when I really got to learn the vocabulary, take the classes, and really understand the everything about HRE.
It's interesting because I think much of what passes for humanities and social science instruction in the United States could be infused with an enormous amount about human rights, but rarely is it done, particularly in K-12, and I think actually even less in some cases in college, depending upon which degree program you pursue, you know. But let's turn now to how you first became acquainted with HRE USA and the Edmonds Fellows. Emma, why don't you start?
Sure. So I first became acquainted with Human Rights Educators USA in early 2021. I had started doing human rights coursework once I got to college, and this was during my first human rights like introductory class. I was working on a project on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child for part of my coursework, and I ended up reaching out to Christy Rudelius Palmer, who supervises the Edmonds Fellowship, to talk to an expert because I found myself so interested in the advocacy that Human Rights Educators USA was doing and its partners were doing in this specific area around children's rights. Um, I stayed in touch with Christy over the years as I continued to do youth-facing work. And after completing a AmeriCorps term in the California Central Valley as a youth worker, I decided to apply for the Edmonds Fellowship. Um, I think in the podcast later we'll talk about it a little bit more, but I got to do work on the Convention on the Rights of the Child as an Edmonds Fellow under Christy. So it was a really sweet full circle moment for me.
Okay, Cara, why don't you go next?
So at Albion, I started working through our human rights lab, and the director was Dr. Carrie Booth Walling, and I worked very closely with her. She's a part of the HRE USA network, and in the summer of 2023, while I was working with her, she shared with me the information about the Edmonds Fellowship, and I decided to apply because it looked very interesting and aligned with a lot of the work I'd been doing around developing training curriculums, kind of fit with the Training as Action series idea.
Okay, Ara, how about you?
Yeah, one of the degrees that I'm pursuing at UC Berkeley is public policy, and I was really fortunate to come across the HRE USA organization and the Edmonds Fellowship Program through my school's newsletter. It caught my eye right away when I saw it because I just remember reading about HRE USA's mission, and I definitely resonated with it a lot. So I just knew I had to put in an application right away and right from the start, like my interview process with Christy and Hallie, and it was great. Everyone was so enthusiastic about their work, and I just instantly felt a connection with the people that I was meeting. And yeah, I was really fortunate to start working with HR USA then.
Carly?
Like Ara, I found HRE USA from my school's newsletter. They put out a little information thing about the Training as Action series for 2023. And I ended up registering for a voting rights session from that Training as Action series. And from there, I started looking more into HRE USA and really appreciated the work they were doing. My master's thesis topic was on the rights of children in armed conflict. And I really felt like the work that HRE USA was doing really aligned with that. So when I saw the Edmonds Fellowship information posted, I knew I really wanted to apply for that just because I felt the work HRE USA was doing really aligned with the work I was doing in my graduate studies.
And Hallie?
So I had first heard about Human Rights Educators USA through the group that I mentioned a bit previously, Human Rights Watch Student Task Force, which is an LA-based group for high school students to engage in human rights advocacy and activism. And I had really strong mentors through that program who were also involved and continue to be involved with Human Rights Educators USA. So once they had heard about the Edmonds Fellowship and once that project kind of came to life, they had recommended that I apply for it. And I was still sort of finding my footing up in Berkeley and figuring out what exactly I wanted to do in the long term. And I knew it related to human rights advocacy. I was studying political science with minors in human rights and public policy, similar to Ara, and knew that this Edmonds Fellowship was a great outlet for me to kind of transition my past younger experience in human rights activism, especially on a local level, to a more kind of formal and higher level experience and to get engaged with more organizations who are doing work nationwide. So I applied for the Edmonds Fellowship and was able to do the Community Engagement and Development Program in 2022. And then I just had really great mentorship from Christy Rodelius Palmer and Christina Eberbach. And I felt really, really grateful to get to work with them through that fellowship, which then translated into the steering committee, which I serve on now, and helping out with the 2024 fellowship as a supervisor. So I'm really grateful to have gotten involved in 2022, and I'm still continuing to be involved in different projects.
So, Hallie, I'm going to continue with you. I'd like you to briefly describe the work you did. And I think it's important to just give the public an understanding of what the fellowship experience is, and then how you would assess its impact.
Absolutely. Truly, I can say that the Edmonds Fellowship was what really solidified my desire to continue working in the human rights field and to kind of figure out what my pathway was going to be after high school and now post graduation from college as well. So, in the 2022 Edmonds Fellowship that I completed, I worked on the Community Engagement and Development Project. So, this included compiling an organizational database of HRE organizations nationwide to continue developing relationships that we had already had pre-existing with HRE USA and also to identify new relationships to kind of maximize collaboration towards HRE nationwide. We also worked a bit on fundraising for the next generation of Edmonds Fellows, which I'm so excited to say that we have had so many generations after my involvement of really fantastic Edmonds Fellows and projects. And we also worked on interviewing HRE USA network members and publishing profiles to our website to kind of talk to folks who are in our community and in our networks and identify some of those really strong, powerful leaders that we have because we have such a robust community of people who are powerhouses in the human rights and human rights education field. And so it was really an amazing project to get to connect with people and to learn about all the different outlets to be an advocate for human rights. In terms of impact, I would say short-term impacts on me personally is that it gave me a much deeper insight into how both fundraising works, networking works, and how building organizational capacity can kind of affect how the work gets done. And I think with HRE USA, that's such a special thing because we have such a robust community of people all over not only the country, but the world. And we're still able to connect and maximize our impact and to complete really impactful projects like the Training as Action series, like Human Rights Day celebrations, and so much more. And long-term impacts too on me were connecting me with different leaders in the community who I've stayed in touch with throughout the years and gotten involved on different organization levels and allowed me to connect with folks as a young person trying to transition into the human rights education and advocacy space. Gave me really, really great mentors and people to connect with and work with to kind of learn and grow and build my own capacity for being a strong advocate.
Emma, would you say your experience was similar or comparable? And talk about your own.
Yeah, I would say my experience was comparable to what Hallie talked about. It was just a very empowering experience to be able to work with an org that I had, previously connected with, and then to be able to do human rights projects, specifically on something that I was particularly passionate about, being children's rights. And you helped me sharpen my focus as I'm now a law student into doing children's rights advocacy as a lawyer and thinking about that in the context of practicing law.
I want to pursue one thing with you briefly, though. How was it similar or different from your AmeriCorps work?
I found that I had more freedoms with Human Rights Educators USA in AmeriCorps because it's a federally funded program. You have to be careful about certain things you say. And specifically in working with youth, that meant, sometimes I couldn't answer like direct questions about like my politics or the things that I believe or my philosophy, just because that wasn't permitted due to the fact that I was receiving funding from like the federal government. So in human rights educators, being able to bring my, philosophy and perspectives on human rights and be able to include that in my work was just very different and very, very welcome change from my time in AmeriCorps.
Go ahead, Carly.
During my time with the Edmonds Fellows, I got to work alongside Emma, and I think our projects were slightly different from Hallie's, but I think our overall experience was really similar in the way that it was just a wholly positive experience. But Emma and I got to work together to develop the Training as Action series for this current year. And that was a really impactful experience working alongside Emma. One, it was nice to work with other people who are passionate about children's rights. But then two, it was a nice reminder to myself of why I'm doing the work that I do, and that I want to continue to pursue human rights education work in the long run, and just reinforcing the importance and power in advocating for children's rights through our work in developing the Training as Action program. I think the short-term impact was that we were able to develop this really cool program. And I will say Emma did a lot of the work in the curriculum, and she made an amazing curriculum for this upcoming year. That's going to be really impactful on people and bringing them into human rights education. But I think long term, for me, it was a really nice reminder that this is worthwhile work that can create real impacts. And just working alongside this amazing group of people re-solidified that for me.
Go ahead, Cara.
So during my fellowship, I primarily worked on the 2023-2024 Training as Action series. And kind of like everyone has been saying, just being a part of the fellowship really did have a major impact on me. I want to go into law, but work in some rights-based non-governmental organizations. So the opportunity to have that experience so young in undergrad and really start doing this work and realize, yes, this is the kind of work I want to be doing, while also building my network and becoming a part of this HRE USA and human rights family where everyone's so supportive and uplifting and empowering. I feel like I've gained the connections and skills to really go out and start doing this work and gain the confidence as well to that I can take action and others can as well.
Aura?
Yeah, as a 2024 Kirby Edmonds Fellow, I extensively worked on a project focusing on fundraising strategy and sustainability. My focus was really on helping HRE USA build a stronger foundation for its work and its fundraising. So I worked on putting together but fundraising calendars for key campaigns such as the Kirby Edmonds Fellowship Fund and the end of the year human rights initiatives that we have. So I came up with a lot of different themes and strategies that resulted from, a lot of extensive research to keep those efforts strong going forward. And over the fellowship, I was able to raise almost $3,000 for the Kirby Edmonds Fellowship Fund. And our current end of the year campaign that's going on right now has raised almost $8,000 so far. So that really fills my cup because that came from things like personalized outreach, writing for different newsletters and engaging with the HRE USA community through social media. So it was just really awesome to see that support come in and getting to contribute to something so impactful that I know that work is going to help also lay the groundwork for future fellows to build upon in the long term as well.
So each of you have alluded to other human rights activities you've been involved in, either when you were in high school or even in other dimensions of your lives. What I'm interested in about this is the degree to which you see connections between your work as a fellow and perhaps a human rights initiative that has nothing to do with your project in the Human Rights Fellowship with the Edmonds Fellows. So, Carly, do you see a connection there? And if so, what would it be?
I absolutely see a connection between my work as an Edmonds Fellow and my outside human rights work. I think that with my work on rights of children in armed conflict and researching violations during armed conflict, centering the role of human rights and the protections for children is really interconnected between that my academic sphere and my work with the Edmonds Fellowship. I've also worked a lot with like election rights. So I've served as an election inspector since 2018. I've been a canvasser for various different campaigns and groups. And I think that is really about, again, protecting the rights and educating people about their rights, whether that be like the right to vote absentee in Michigan or early voting, or the rights you have when you're in the polling place. But I really see connections between informing people about their rights and the work HRE USA does specifically with the Training as Action series, where there's a really strong focus and emphasis on educating people about their rights and encouraging and empowering people to advocate for human rights and the advancement of human rights. And I think that a lot of my passion for these various different human rights issues stems from human rights education that I've received. Most of that formal education was in like graduate and undergraduate studies for me, but I have looking back now can see how a lot of the things that I was passionate about even in high school and middle school are interconnected. And I think that is like the great work that HRE USA is doing too in empowering K-12 educators and professors to engage this human rights vocabulary.
Cara, what about you?
Yes, I think there is definitely a connection. And the more I get involved with human rights, the more I can start to take a human rights lens and all of the different involvements I'm in. And we see through our HRE USA network just how wide that lens can be from the social sciences, but also like the arts and language and how important those are. And one thing that was really interesting for me this year is this fall, I worked some with the other fellows as well. We put on a roundtable on mis and disinformation during an election year and got to develop a collection from that. And then at the same time this fall, I was on our voting coalition task force at my school. And so was able to make a lot of connections there. And then my school put on an event on misinformation. And then I could share some of the resources that we had put together through the fellowship with my peers during that event. And so there's so many different connections that I feel like are constantly building on each other and constantly being able to share resources and experiences back and forth.
Go ahead, Hallie.
think similar to what everyone has said, there are certainly connections between other organizations I've worked with and HRE USA. And I think that the Edmonds Fellowship also really strongly equipped me to see those connections. And instead of viewing my engagements as different projects and different parts of, my human rights advocacy work, all falling under the same umbrella instead, which I think is a really crucial part of the efforts of human rights educators, sorry, and also just human rights advocates at large. Um, so as I mentioned before, a lot of my work aside from HRI USA has fallen in kind of local community engagement and justice work. So I focused a lot on criminal justice work, asylum and immigration protection, food and housing insecurity, voting rights, juvenile and youth justice, all issues which we have both explicitly and implicitly touched on through the Edmonds Fellowship and at HRI USA. And I think the strongest thing that I've been able to kind of pull from this Edmonds Fellowship and my time at HRI USA in general is that collaboration and communication. I think being up in the Bay Area in California for a few years while I really was starting to get involved in HR USA was a huge reason for this. So while I had my organizations I was involved with in Berkeley and my community at school, I also was tapping into the HR USA community, and we were able to bridge a lot of different organizations and groups together to have this kind of maximum impact and just sense of community at times that were really crucial for, building our own personal capacities and as organizations. So just one example of this too was our Human Rights Day celebration in 2023 in San Francisco, where we were able to work with quite a few different organizations, including HRE USA, to put together a hybrid event to celebrate, the arts, human rights, education, community building, and organizing. And we had folks from all different walks of life who were able to attend both in person and virtually. And we were able to bridge some really strong connections between organizations focused on human rights advocacy and human rights education advocacy specifically. And we're able to bring some new folks who haven't engaged in that work before into the space. So I think the connections and the collaboration, the sense of community that HRI USA and the Edmonds Fellowship taught me have kind of bridged between every different avenue of involvement I've been in since.
Laura, how about you?
For me, outside of my work with HRE USA, I'm also the gender and sexuality director of a multicultural organization that's university funded at University of California, Berkeley. It's a very multifaceted role that I get to do a lot with, which I love. So in this role, I work to create different equitable opportunities and get a chance to foster a sense of inclusion for a lot of underrepresented students at my college. So one of the things I get to do is organize events and workshops that bring students together to explore opportunities for higher education. That can also, provide a space for them to have some cross-cultural dialogue and experience diversity. So, we've hosted a lot of group therapy circles, wellness drives, and a lot of educational workshops. That lets them know that higher education is a possibility. Through this work, I've also supported LGBTQ plus students in our community. I think in today's day and age, finding spaces where you can feel safe and understood can be a huge challenge. So this role allows me to really focus on creating those spaces and providing the resources necessary. And additionally, another part of my work that I've recently gotten involved with is going on semesterly recruitment trips to a bunch of different underserved high schools in Southern California, where I get the chance to talk with a lot of students about college life and helping them through the application process, which can be really confusing at times. And again, showing them that higher education is something that's within their reach. And this has really filled my cup because I think this work really ties directly into human rights and getting the chance to empower students from marginalized communities such as myself, and really letting them know that they have these opportunities and they can have access to them. I think that's really been fundamental to my human rights journey.
And Emma.
My sort of previous work with human rights prior to the Edmonds Fellowship was working as a researcher, grant writer, and advocate for the non-governmental organization Article 26 Backpack, which is housed at UC Davis's Human Rights Department, working to support refugees and other at-risk individuals in continuing education and furthering their education. So human rights education and the human right to education have sort of been the pillars of how I got involved in human rights advocacy in the first place.
Thanks for listening to Human Rights Education Now. Our next program concludes our conversation with Edmonds Fellows Cara Anderson, Ariana Zigbali, Hallie McRae, Carly Sandstrom, and Emma Tolliver. You can find additional information about this podcast series at www.hreusa.org. Each episode is available on the HRE USA podcast page, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and Deezer. You can also download each episode as an MP3 file. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, send them to Christy at hreusa.org. That's KRISTI at hreusa.org. Our podcast team includes producer and editor Bill Fernikes, executive producer Christy Redelius-Palmer, editor Elizabeth Schwab, sound designer and project manager Sabrina Sanchez, communications and public outreach coordinator Jessica Terbruggen, and production coordinator Jasmine Chizu Gota. Human Rights Education Now is a production of Human Rights Educators USA, a project of the Center for Transformative Action in Ithaca, New York.